Welcome to World Missions University's Teaching Techniques, Ministry 113. This is Lesson 5, Behavioral Objectives. Leaving the scientific theories on how learning happens, this is the first lesson regarding how we make learning happen. In preparation for this class, you should read Teacher and Staff Development, Book 2, the chapters entitled Building a Positive Learning Culture, Lesson Preparation, Course Planning, and The Teacher and His Lecture. By the time you finish with this class, you should be able to create behavioral objectives or competencies that include the components of performance, conditions, and criteria, and use Bloom's taxonomy to modify your objectives to reflect at least 3 higher levels. We begin every lesson with a plan, a goal. We ask ourselves the question, what do I want the student to be able to do after instruction? How can I know if my lesson was successful, if I don't know where my student is now and where they should be after instruction? A lesson plan's objectives must be a clear expression of your expectations. Each plan's objectives must have 3 components in order to be clear to you and to others who may look at your lesson plans. The first is performance. Performance describes what the student will be able to do, tells you how you will evaluate if the students meet the objectives or not. What do you want the students to know? How do you want them to be different after instruction? The performance component is always expressed as an action verb. The student will recite, explain, run, make, create, debate, sing. To know something is not an action verb. It's difficult to measure how a person knows something. Conditions are the circumstances under which the performance will take place. Includes tools and resources, what they will use, what they will not use, the environment, a time frame. Criteria is the level of acceptance for success and can be expressed as speed, accuracy, or statistically as a percentage. Objectives have certain qualities that make them more accurate. They must be relevant to what you are teaching. If you are teaching from the Psalms, knowing the names of the 12 apostles might not be relevant. They must be unequivocal, unmistakable, and explicit, as well as observable and measurable. You cannot measure how a student feels about something. They must be reasonable and logical. As we've studied before, we cannot expect a 4-year-old to understand sanctification. Objectives have certain characteristics in common that make them more applicable. They must be consistent with the overall goals of the school. We're not going to teach the benefits of Hinduism at our Christian school. They must be clearly stated in language that everyone involved can understand. They must be realistic and doable. We cannot expect our students to be able to outperform we ourselves in less time than it took for us to learn a lesson. They must be appropriate for the learner's stages of development. A beginner Bible college student will not often be able to grasp a deeper understanding of eschatology when they haven't grasped that there are 27 books in the New Testament. They must be appropriately comprehensive and worthy, complex outcomes that fit what you're trying to accomplish. They cannot be etched in stone, but rather flexible. In 2 different classes I have worked with, one picked up on a concept much faster than the other did, and therefore allowed me to move much faster and deeper than the other class might have allowed. And your objectives should not be regarded as the only valuable outcomes. Remember, as a teacher, you must be a lifelong learner yourself. Many times I have gotten insight into Scripture myself in the middle of a class as I am teaching. Allow the Spirit of God to move you in one direction or another as you teach and plan. Objectives should have particular purpose and function. They should act as a guide for the teacher relative to the design of your instruction. They should also act as a guide for the teacher for evaluation, assessment, and test design. Many times, as I'm writing a quiz, I have to look back at my lesson objectives to make sure I haven't strayed into foreign territory. They should act as a guide for the student as well. Notice that at the beginning of each class, the objectives are clearly stated, not only for you, the student, to know what you should expect, but also for the teacher to keep on track. They should act as a guide for the student to assess what they should have taken away from the lesson. The objectives tell others what we value, what's important. The objectives cause us to think clearly and carefully about what we want to accomplish when we finish a lesson or a class. The objectives improve the relationship between the teacher and learner. With explicit objectives, the instructor is viewed less as an adversary and more as an advocate, because both the teacher and the learner are clear about what is to be learned. No one is guessing. The objective enhances the possibility of creating focused, independent learning materials and makes teaching more directed and organized. Objectives communicate to colleagues, and in fact to all involved, what you are teaching. This enhances collaboration and teamwork with your colleagues. Objectives help facilitate those situations in which we want students to be able to demonstrate competency. Objectives help us evaluate not only a lesson, but an entire class or program for effectiveness. Objectives force us to think carefully and define clearly what is important. Objectives help us avoid unnecessary repetitions in teaching, such as repeating that there are 28 books in the New Testament. Objectives provide visibility and accountability for decisions made by teachers and accountability by the learners as well. Objectives provide models for the same type of goal-setting ability within the students and helps them make their own decisions about priorities in their own lives. Finally, objectives provide feedback to the students as each of the objectives are accomplished. Let's talk about practical application of the objective writing process. As we mentioned, each objective needs to begin with an action verb What do you want the student to be able to do at the end of the lesson? Pause the presentation here and read each of these out loud if you are an auditory learner, and be sure you understand what each of these words mean. This is not a comprehensive list. Your own objective doesn't have to start with one of these words, but rather these are examples of what you might use. Next, we state the objective in terms of student performance. What do we want the student to do? It is helpful to view the objective as a product rather than a process. State one outcome, behavior, or product in each objective. If you find yourself with two things you would like the student to do, break them up into two objectives. Objectives must be clear and brief. In order to better understand what a good objective looks like, let's see what a bad objective looks like. Look at the bad example and see if you can understand the problem in this objective. Do you see it? I gave you a clue. The answer is in the performance section. How do we define what is an acceptable level of understand? Furthermore, there's no conditions or criteria present. A good example is the second. In the performance section, we have an action verb, describe. Although we might be more specific as to how they might describe. Is it written or verbal, interpretive dance? The conditions here are from memory, and the criteria here is the theories of evolution and creation found in the JEDP theory. Let's look at another bad example. The student will know the books of the New Testament. First is the performance. How do we define what is an acceptable level of know? Again, there's no conditions or criteria. A good example is this. The student will recite from memory and in order the 29 books of the New Testament with one or fewer mistakes. By the way, did you catch that I purposely made a mistake in this presentation, saying first that there were 27, then later 28 books of the New Testament? See, the performance has the action verb recite, and the conditions are from memory, in order, and one or fewer mistakes. Finally, notice the criteria, the 29 books of the New Testament. We take a step backwards toward the scientific theory section and begin to talk about what we call Bloom's taxonomy. And we talk about it here and not in the previous section because it has so much application into behavioral objectives. Using Bloom's taxonomy is quite advanced, but understanding it will give you greater insight into moving from a regular teacher and becoming a very good teacher, a teacher that is both effective and efficient, a master teacher. Benjamin Bloom was an educator that looked closely at how people think. He created 3 hierarchical models used for classification of educational learning objectives. These 3 models deal with the cognitive domain, knowledge-based, the affective domain, emotion-based, and the psychomotor domain, action-based. These models help teachers teach and students learn, and gives teachers a way to think about their objectives and their teaching. we're going to examine the cognitive domain only for now. It is presented here in a pyramid, but should not be confused with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is also presented in a pyramid. Bloom identified 6 levels of objectives. Each of these rise in the level of difficulty, complexity, and specificity. We begin with the remembering level. In this level of Bloom's taxonomy, questions are asked solely to test whether a student has gained specific information from the lesson. For example, have they memorized the dates of the destruction of Jerusalem? Or do they know who Judas Maccabee was from history? It also includes knowledge of the main ideas that are being taught. Keywords that you would use in your objectives are who, what, why, when, where, which, choose, find, how, define, label, show, spell, list, match, name, relate, tell, recall, select. The understanding or comprehension level of Bloom's taxonomy has students go past simply recalling facts and instead has them demonstrate understanding of information. With this level, they will be able to interpret the facts instead of simply being able to name the various groups of New Testament books. The students would be able to understand why each book is part of each group. The key words here that you might use in your objectives are compare, contrast, demonstrate, interpret, explain, extend, illustrate, infer, outline, relate, rephrase, translate, summarize, show, or classify. The application level questions are those where students have to actually apply or use the knowledge they have learned. They might be asked to solve a problem with the information they have gained in class being necessary to create a viable solution. For example, a student might be asked to interpret a scripture in a hermeneutics class using the rules of interpretation they've learned. Keywords for your objectives for this level are apply, build, choose, construct, develop, interview, make use of, organize, experiment with, plan, select, solve, utilize, or model. In the analysis level, students are required to go beyond knowledge and application and actually see patterns that they can use to analyze a problem. For example, you might ask what the reasons a king of Israel went to war against Judah. This requires students to analyze the character and come to a conclusion based on this analysis. Keywords that you would use in your objectives might be analyze, categorize, classify, compare, contrast, discover, dissect, divide, examine, inspect, simplify, survey, test for, distinguish, list, distinction, theme, relationships, function, motive, inference, assumption, conclusion, or take part in. In evaluation, students are expected to assess information and come to a conclusion such as its value or the bias that an author may present. For example, if the students are completing an essay on past interpretations of Revelation that didn't come true, they are expected to evaluate the bias behind any primary or secondary sources in order to see the influence that the speaker is making on a topic. Terms that you might use in your objectives for this level might be award, choose, conclude, criticize, decide, defend, determine, dispute, evaluate, judge, justify, measure, compare, mark, rate, recommend, rule on, select, agree, appraise, prioritize, opinion, interpret, explain, support, importance, criteria, prove, disprove, assess, influence, perceive, value, estimate, or deduct. The top level of Bloom's taxonomy is creating. With this, students are required to use the given facts to create new theories or make predictions. They might have to pull in knowledge from multiple subjects and synthesize this information before coming to a conclusion. For example, if a student is asked to write a new Bible study literature geared toward new converts from Islam, some key words that you might see in this type of objective would be build, choose, combine, compile, compose, construct, create, design, develop, estimate, formulate, imagine, invent, make up, originate, plan, predict, propose, solve, solution, suppose, discuss, modify, change, original, improve, adapt, minimize, maximize, theorize, elaborate, test, happen. Delete words like select, judge, debate, or recommend. For the next lesson, read Teacher and Staff Development, Book 2, the chapter called Increasing Student Learning. Also, read these handouts: 150 teaching methods, lesson methodologies, direct instruction, and discussions.